welcome to the final lecture for this week, week 2. Now we're talking about, as promised, noun modifiers. So we need to look at these because they can be confusing when we're looking for independent clauses. That is to say, nouns can be modified with things that look very similar to independent clauses. They've got a few differences though, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Just in general, having the terminology for noun modifiers helps us to expand variety in our own writing. And next week is when you're going to be doing your own writing rather than these markups. And I'm going to ask you to use certain constructions. And so the noun modifiers that I introduced today, you're going to be using next week. Okay? You use them automatically, by the way. Now you know what they're called. So there are two kinds of noun modifiers, ones that occur before the noun, which are called prenominal modifiers, and they're adjectives. So if I say a pretty dress, pretty is a prenominal noun modifier, also known as an adjective. There are also modifiers that occur after the noun, and they take the form of relative clauses, and there are a few kinds of relative clauses that we're going to look at. And also prepositional phrases. Our friend, the prepositional phrase, shows up again, looking very similar to the things that we saw when they were sentence modifiers. Importantly, a noun can have both pre and post-nominal modifiers. Adjectives are pretty straightforward, so we're going to be focusing on the post-nominal ones. Adjectives add extra description to the noun. So the second bullet point, third bullet point, I guess, is an example. More than 1,000 flights in and out of New York's 3 major airports were grounded. So we call major an adjective. Clearly it's not the only thing that can occur in front of a noun. So more than 1,000 occurs in front of the noun. 3, and New York's 3. Are also things that occur before the noun, but they're not adjectives, they're sort of different. New York's is a possessive noun phrase. We're going to be spending some time with them next week. 3 is a number, 1,000 is a number, more than is a comparative, you know, all these terms. This is why we're not really worrying about prenominal modifiers. They're easy to find, and they don't make that much of a difference in terms of finding the head noun. You can just ignore them. At least hopefully by the time you finished the week 1 lectures, you could find a head noun like it was. Second nature. So the second example shows some other nice adjectives. Military wives and husbands. Military functions as an adjective there. And hot button issue. Hot button is a very nice adjective. Also military families. Okay, that's it basically on adjectives. We're not doing any more. Oh, apparently we are. Present and past participles can function as adjectives. So you'll see things like an expanded version. We can tell this isn't functioning as a part of a verb phrase or as a participial phrase because it comes between an article, an, and a noun version. So be careful. This is why the surrounding context is really important. Competing, also, a competing vaccine. This is an ing. Compete is a verb, so it's a present participle, but it's functioning as an adjective. So once again, we saw this in the first week. The function is what we care about here. Things have their own inherent categories, but you've got to look at the surrounding context to figure out how they're working in a particular environment, and that's what we care about here. All right, here we are. Post-nominal modifiers. Especially formal writing. Use post-nominal modifiers. We're going to look at 4 types: prepositional phrases, and then the other kinds are all different kinds of relative clauses. Restrictive relative clauses, they can come in either a reduced form or a full form, or non-restrictive relative clauses. And whether a relative clause is restrictive or non-restrictive depends on whether the relative clause is essential to establish what the noun phrase identifies. So we'll see some examples. But basically, Is it essential or is it extra information is the question you need to be asking yourself. Then the difference between reduced and full is, does it have an auxiliary verb? So pretty easy. We'll see. Prepositional phrases, we know all about them now. They begin with a preposition. They look very similar to the sentence modifiers, but they tell us something about the noun. They can also be stacked. That means you can have a lot of prepositional phrases hanging off the back of a noun. So let's have a look here. The head noun in this prepositional phrase is grants, and we've got grants of up to $6,000. That's one prepositional phrase. For college or career training. Both of these tell you something about the noun phrase, and they can function independently. I could just say offering them grants of up to $6,000, offering them grants for college or career training. But the author here of this military spouses article has included both of them. So we count this as two prepositional phrases. Why? Because there are two prepositions, of and for. You'll see some examples. There's examples in your textbook. Spend some time finding, on the wiki would be good too, finding prepositional phrases. The New York Times in particular is full of them. Okay, what's a relative clause? A relative clause is a full clause. So just like a dependent clause is a full clause with some extra information, a relative clause is a full clause with some extra stuff as well. And they function differently from an independent clause. They add information to a noun rather than serving as sentences in their own right. Sometimes their subject is a relative pronoun, and this is an important term, whose antecedent is the head noun of the whole noun phrase. So here's one example. There on campus, where he had gone to law school, etc., etc. So where tells us more about the campus. That where, and I've marked it as R pro, attaches that clause, he had gone to law school, to the noun. So you can think of relative pronouns as sort of glue. There's another one in the bullet point above, whose. Sometimes their subject is a relative pronoun whose antecedent is the head noun of the whole noun phrase. So whose attaches this description. Antecedent is the head noun of the whole noun phrase. This is a full clause. The subject contains whose, but the whole subject is whose antecedent. That whose attaches that information in the relative clause to the head noun of the independent clause of the whole sentence, which in this case is sometimes their subject is a relative pronoun. So I could say sometimes their subject is a relative pronoun, and that's a complete sentence in itself. I added the extra information to tell you more, just to make it easier to figure out what I'm talking about. If I just say whose antecedent is the head noun of the whole noun phrase, and notice my intonation, notice the way I said it, it's not a question. Whose antecedent is the head noun of the whole noun phrase. That's not a complete clause. By saying it that way and starting with the whose, I'm indicating that this clause needs to be attached to something. That's why it's a relative clause. It's only got status relative to something else. So restrictive relative clauses are full clauses that are necessary to identify what the noun phrase that they occur in refers to. So here are our 5 relative pronouns: whose, which, that, who, and when. We could probably add how. Did you find out how he did it? Maybe not. Stick with these. A reduced relative clause. They're still necessary. They function like these these restrictive relative clauses. Reduced relative clauses are always restrictive relative clauses. They're necessary to identify the referent of the noun phrase, but they're missing the relative pronoun and an auxiliary verb. So here's an example. These applications were overwhelming the system intended to support the program. So see that thing? We find the head noun of the noun phrase, system, and then it's got a reduced relative clause, which I've underlined and marked as RRC. We see that there's no relative pronoun, there's no auxiliary, but there is a main verb, a past participle. And you can see that if you need a test, have a look at the fourth bullet point. If we have a reduced relative clause, we should be able to add in which was or who was or something like that to make it, and that would make it into a full relative clause. So that's your test to see whether you're dealing with a restrictive or a non-restrictive relative clause. And you can add and subtract which was to see whether you've got a reduced relative clause or a full relative clause. Clearly, if you have a full relative clause, you're not going to be able to add this in without sounding stupid because it will be a repetition. Non-restrictive relative clauses give interesting information, but they aren't necessary to identify the noun phrases referent. They often occur after names. They're very common in journalistic writing. So here's an example. At the same time, questions were emerging about the role of state police officials. So we're looking at something that adds information to state police officials, this noun phrase here, who had initially described their contact with the woman as an effort to offer her counseling and let her know of her options. So this sentence is complete if we put a period after state police officials, right? But the author of this article decided we needed more information about what was going on with these state police officials. So they added this non-restrictive relative clause. And that's the test. Can we identify the referent of the noun phrase without the relative clause? In this case, yes. See, same thing in the second example. The DoD showed a lack of respect for the spouses, said Rebecca Duncan. That could be the end of the sentence here, but we've got two extra pieces of information. 36, so age, I'm not sure why that's relevant. A medical office assistant whose husband is stationed with the Navy in Corpus Christi, Texas. So that all gives her information. We see that assistant is a head noun too, and it has another reduced... It's a full relative clause. I think actually that who's there is a restrictive relative clause because it tells us exactly about the medical office assistant. So clearly these need a lot of practice. That was a very quick way of doing it. You'll see more in the practice assignment and when I do when you view the lecture about how to do assignment number 2. You'll see more examples of the variety of these relative clauses. So read pages 41, 42, page 44, and 68 to 74 in your textbook. There's a lot to do with nouns. They're very important. Do quiz number 6. That'll help you identify things. Keep working on the practice markup. Again, that's your play space. That's where you can figure things out and get some feedback. All I want to see when I'm grading that is that you're doing it. You don't have to get it right. Okay? Good luck. That's the last contact lecture for this week. Stay tuned for how to do assignment number 2 lecture and an assignment for you. Okay, goodbye.